Welcome to Victory Church Craddock. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.
Tonight I just wanted to share a word that I felt I had a word prepared during the week, and then God just took me on a completely different journey, which then I know that it's a now topic. But we hate being uncomfortable. When things go wrong in our lives, how often don't we fall down under our broom tree and tell God we've had enough? We want to be delivered from the predicament that we find ourselves in, which we've often got into because we haven't listened to what Jesus had to say in the first place. And then we cry, "Oh God, rescue me." And the Bible tells us that our every need will be taken care of. And we see many instances where God came through with provision for his people. The cloud, the pillar of fire, the manna and the quail. And then when the ravens delivered food for Elijah. And Elijah's a very interesting and colorful character, and I'd like to share some stuff with you tonight about him. So the story starts in the book of Kings, and God tells Elijah to go to King Ahab and to tell King Ahab that there's not going to be any dew or any rain for a few years until Elijah gives the word. And then God tells Elijah to go to the Kirsten Brook and to stay there. Obviously, with there being a drought, or with there being difficulty, the king sends his men all over the land to try and find Elijah so that he would give the word for rain to come again. But God arranges provision, and the ravens bring bread and meat twice a day to Elijah, and he can drink as much as he likes from the brook. And as the drought gets worse, then eventually the brook dries up, and God says to Elijah, "Now you need to go to Zarephath, where the widow is. You will find her, and you to go and stay with her." And again, God provides. He gives an endless supply of grain and oil for Elijah through the widow. And then in the third year, God tells Elijah to go and present himself again to the king. So Elijah arrives at the king's door and says, "Hi, it's me again." And he tells the king that because you and your family have been worshipping Baal instead of God, we are going to have a little competition. And we are going to see whether my God or your false gods are the one true God. So gather all your people, and we're going to meet on this mountain, and we are going to erect an altar where we will put an offering, and we'll see whose offering is accepted by which God. So there's something about facing an enemy that teaches us to trust God's power. So in an incredibly dramatic display of God's immense power, fire falls from heaven. And as the flames consume everything on the altar, even the water in the trench, the people fall face down, declaring that the Lord is God, and revival breaks out. Elijah tells the people to seize the false prophets, and he promptly kills them. And then Elijah prays, and for the first time in 3.5 years, it rains. Meanwhile, King Ahab tells his wife Jezebel exactly what Elijah has done, how he's murdered the false prophets, and she sends a message to Elijah telling him that she's going to kill him. So Elijah panics, and he flees to the wilderness. Running for his life, he arrives, terrified, lonely, exhausted, and utterly defeated. And that's where we find him collapsed under the broom tree, begging God to take his life before he gets slaughtered. So we have to pause here and ask a few questions. This man has so much faith that he calls down fire from heaven. He goes to the king and tells the king some very unpleasant facts about himself. He has a revival breakout and eliminates all the prophets of Baal. He experiences the daily provision at the widow, with the widow and her son, and he raises the widow's son from dead when the child dies. So how does he end up terrified under the broom tree? James describes Elijah as a man with a nature like ours. Elijah was a human just like us, and he constantly struggled with his emotions. He had such great faith for God to display his power and might to the Israelite nation and show them just who he was, but a complete lack of faith that the same awesome God would protect him. He would have these incredible highs where there were victories with God, and then these very low lows where he would become depressed and end up under the broom tree. It's so weird how he allowed the evidence of his everyday reality to overwhelm what he had experienced and knew about God. He was discouraged, lonely, and ruled by fear because he was living out of a false identity, and he had allowed himself to view his situation through the human lens of reason. How does God respond? He doesn't condemn Elijah, asking him, "What the heck, Elijah? Haven't you just learned anything from what we've been through? You know, what are you doing? Get up. Stop feeling sorry for yourself." No. God gently renews Elijah's faith with a double portion of food and drink and rest. Completely opposite to what we expect, hey? You see, we rest for what's coming. Because then God sends Elijah to Mount Sinai, where he hides in the cave, still without direction, still not knowing what to do next, and still terrified that he was going to be killed. And God commands him to go and stand before him on the mountain. And with another demonstration of his immense power, a mighty blast of wind that tore the rocks apart. But God was not in the wind. And then there was an earthquake, and God wasn't in the earthquake. And then there was a fire, and God wasn't in the fire. And then there was a gentle whisper. And God whispers to Elijah's heart, and he gives him his new commission. And he assures him that he's not alone in the battle. You see, Elijah did not understand God's plan, but he still searched God out. And in return, he saw God's constant power displayed in his weakness. Elijah's protection depended on him surrendering to God. He had to be in the right place at the right time for the ravens to bring the food to him at the brook, or he would have starved during the drought. When God sent him to Zarephath, he would not have found the widow if he hadn't followed God's instructions. God gave him the strength to find his faith again through his direction, his provision, and his correction. It's interesting how God sends the last thing we think we need. When Elijah prays for God to take his life, God refreshes him instead. When we expect God to send us an email of our next assignment, God whispers to us in our secret place. God relates to us intimately and personally. When we are in fellowship with God, we are open to hearing His will. And when we are in God's will, He fulfills all our needs. What we need, God will bring to us. What we want, we have to go after. When we go through a wilderness season, we sit under the broom tree and we cry out to God to rescue us from our current circumstances. You know, immediate solutions are self-serving. They do not transform hearts, and they do not pioneer new ways. Jesus didn't come to rescue us. He came to reconcile us to the Father in relationship where we get to experience God's goodness. We want an outcome. God wants a relational journey. A journey provides an opportunity for our transformation as we obediently submit and allow the instruction, correction, and the fire of God to come and purify us. God instructed Elijah to hide, and while he was hiding, he experienced God's provision and His guidance. Before God calls someone, He often secludes them for a while. He hides us so that He has our undivided attention, helping us to grow in faith and patience as we experience His provision. There are times to be courageous, and there are times to hide. And we need to be sensitive to God's leading to discern the difference. Remember Jonah, who tried to hide when God commissioned him? Elijah is regarded as the greatest prophet in the Bible and appears with Jesus at the Transfiguration, which is recorded in Luke 9. He was passionate for the glory of God, obedient, and a man with fire in his belly. His journey ended with him not dying, but being taken up to heaven. I feel tonight that there are people who are sitting under the broom tree, feeling utterly defeated, no longer trusting in the power of God. But I pray tonight that we would be a people who would call down fire from heaven to see the manifest glory of God and revival in our city. So if there's anybody here tonight who feels defeated and sitting under your broom tree, I want to invite you to come forward for prayer when we start worship again. We want to replace your broom tree with fire. That God would burn what is rubbish and purify you for your ministry. Because we all have a ministry.